report and to the full implementation of the terms of the report. And again, I'd like to thank the Labour Party for bringing forward this debate and you, Minister, for coming along here and giving us the time to deal with the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Van Turnhout, you have 8 minutes.
Thank you. Welcome, Minister, to the House, and I too would like to thank our Labour Party colleagues for giving us this opportunity for members of Seanad to make statements on the scandalous medical malpractice of symphysiotomy, which was performed in Ireland on at least 1,500 occasions between 1944 and 1992. I'd also like to extend the warmest of welcome to the survivors of symphysiotomy who are here with us today, both in the gallery and in other rooms. I commend the dignity, the bravery and the honesty they have shown in sharing their personal traumas with us during a number of Oireachtas briefing and information sessions. And I thank them for opening our eyes to, at very best, utterly inappropriate and at worst barbaric treatment they suffered at the hands of trained medical professionals in Irish hospitals. Minister, I followed the statements on symphysiotomy in the Dáil back in March with great interest, and I agree with Minister Riley, and indeed, as you said yourself here today, that we should be proud that Ireland is recognised internationally as a leader in the field of obstetrics. We should also be very proud that with only one maternal death per 100,000 live births, Ireland has one of the lowest maternal mortality ratios in the world. However, as we know from the statements we're making, we have a far from unblemished record in the area of maternal health care. Between 1920 and as recently as 1992, many suffered serious maternal morbidities under the care of trained medical practitioners in Irish hospitals. Maternal morbidity is defined as an illness or disability in women caused directly or indirectly by factors relating to pregnancy, childbirth or post-delivery period. The vast majority of maternal morbidities are preventable, and as such, their prevalence constitutes a serious violation of women's fundamental rights to life, liberty and security, health, dignity and freedom from cruel, inhumane and degrading treatment. Minister, I, like so many others, are extremely frustrated by the delay in the publication of the report into the practice of symphysiotomy in Ireland. There are very serious concerns that need to be addressed in order for the survivors to receive the acknowledgement, the truth and the justice that they deserve. Chief amongst them, which is the contention by the Institute of Obstetrics and Gynaecology in Ireland, which it seems that the Department of Health, in my opinion, is content to reply on, that the practice of symphysiotomy was carried out due to medical necessity and only until consensus around caesarean section changed and it was deemed safe. It's my hope that in carrying out a critical appraisal of international reviews of symphysiotomy practice and associated rates in comparable countries in the world and an examination of the Irish experience relative to other countries, that this report will refute this contention once and for all. Minister Riley himself acknowledged back in March that symphysiotomy continued to be used in Ireland for some time after it had been all but discontinued in other developed countries and continued to be used for a longer period in particular hospitals, as has been mentioned. Rather than a procedure out of medical necessity, the evidence suggests that symphysiotomy was the preference of some senior doctors, in keeping with their conservative Catholic belief systems, whereby caesarean section had a safe birth limit of up to 4 children, while symphysiotomy would allow women to have an unlimited number of children, despite the horrendous cost to their health and well-being. Minister, the last thing anyone wants is another institutional abuse scandal. But if there is one, and I believe there is, it must be met head-on. We cannot allow the culture of secrecy, collusion and cover-up that surrounds institutional and clerical child sex abuse flourish again now. Otherwise, what have we learnt? I cannot help but see a parallel between the recent calls for Cardinal Brady's resignation and this. Just because something wasn't illegal at the time, or indeed was accepted practice within an institution or a discipline, and in hindsight is found to be utterly inappropriate and morally wrong, it cannot and it should not be immune to contemporary and robust response. Minister, I was disappointed by the limited terms used by Minister Riley during the Dáil statements in March in referring to the experience of the survivors. He spoke of pain and distress. But it's clear to me that having listened to the women's personal testimonies, that descriptions of pain and distress are totally inadequate. In the face of the devastating impact symphysiotomy has had on their lives, and the lives of their families. In addition to the horrendous physical injuries they suffered as a direct result of the procedure, which sustained and worsened in the absence of appropriate aftercare, the serious emotional and psychological suffering they endure must also be acknowledged. Minister, the birth of a child, and for many of the women affected in this, the birth of their first child, should be the most joyful time in a woman's life. Instead, for the survivors, of whom there are a little over 150 surviving today, the birth of their child was the beginning of a nightmare. A nightmare as a result of a medical procedure that they did not consent to. They were not informed that they had had after the fact, did not receive medical treatment and aftercare in respect of, and which evidence suggests was not medically necessary. Shockingly, there are women who, despite having presented to doctors for treatment for various medical ailments over the years, only realised they were survivors after RTE Primetime's investigation into symphysiotomy in February 2010. These women, still presenting as survivors in 2011, and sadly, as more and more time passes, survivors are dying, and we know that at least 4 have passed away since the report into symphysiotomy was commissioned. The women are the primary victims here. We've heard testimonies from women who could not lift or attend to the needs of their newborn babies due to the pain they were in, and of the helpless guilt and shame they felt as a result. We've heard about how their quality of life was irrevocably altered, from those who can no longer play beloved sports to those who can't walk. But we also know they're secondary victims, and they must also be acknowledged. 1 in 10 babies died during symphysiotomy births. Children lost the love and nurture of mothers so traumatised by the experience that they could not bond with their babies and subsequent babies. Likewise, husbands suffered as a result of the effects on their wives. Minister, I note your comments today and Minister Riley's comments in March in relation to the provision of medical care to the survivors, and I welcome that. But I've also heard from the women themselves about the difficulty that some are having accessing the services, and I'm concerned. I'm particularly concerned about the difficulty some are facing accessing their medical records. Some have been told their records no longer exist, while others have been simply denied access. I presume that this is also the same unforeseen difficulty which you've mentioned in relation to the report in explaining the delay in the submission of this report. I do accept that records get lost over the passage of time in isolated incidences. But when it seems to be systematic, my antenna goes up. Then I heard from one woman about her doctor who requested a hospital in Dublin to carry out an X-ray in order to establish whether symphysiotomy was performed on her. In order to establish or indeed rule out symphysiotomy, the doctor had referred the woman to the hospital for a stand-up X-ray specifically. The hospital refused to carry out the X-ray in this manner. Now, Minister, you had talked about addressing the legacy of the past, but this very case I'm sharing with you happened last week, not in the past, which makes me question whether the system is trying to protect itself. So, Minister, I ask you, in ending, can you send out a clear message today that it is totally and utterly unacceptable for the medical profession to frustrate in any way these women's right to redress and remedy? As a closing remark, I'd like to put on the record my full support for setting aside the statute bar to allow these women to seek judicial redress. There is solid precedence for having done this in respect of clerical sex abuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Moran, you have 8 minutes.
Thank you, Hurley.